Thank you. I'm thrilled to be joined by with my now new friend and partner in the struggle, Janine. It's a pleasure to have you this afternoon and talk a little bit about what corporations can be doing to be part of the conversation around social impact and racial injustice in the United States, but also more broadly in the world.
Thank you for having me, and good to hang out with you, Ayana.
I enjoyed talking to you, but then also getting a chance to spend a little more time looking at your biography and all the great work you've done. And I'm curious, you've had a history of working in the area of social impact and communications and community engagement. What got you interested in that space?
I think simply growing up a young Black girl in Brooklyn, walking the neighborhoods, going to school from Flatbush, going to school in Bay Ridge, having a really early understanding of the differences that different communities had afforded to them, and always being curious as to why, wanting to understand more about the community around me, the different religions, culture, how that intersected. And it was really just those basic questions of, how do we get here? How do we live? Why do things appear, as a young child to be not as equitable as it could be?
That's fascinating, and I'm sure that you pulled on all those experiences as you've taken on this new role at BET, overseeing their social impact and communications initiatives and efforts.
Absolutely. I took on this role about a year ago after holding a host of communications roles, marketing roles, a variety of different responsibilities over my 20-year career at Viacom. And, it was just kind of interesting that this job would come together in this way just before COVID and George Floyd and and of course this election, all of which has kept me pretty busy over the past couple of months.
I can imagine. I can't imagine what the conversations have been like over the past 8 months with COVID. And as you said, just the entire conversation that's happening around systemic racism and social injustice. How did it lead BET to decide to take some of the important actions that it's taken over the past several months? We'll talk more about what they are specifically. But what was the conversation like in the room and the impetus to say we must act?
The conversation was simply that because of the space that we live in, I love the conversation about diversity being so important and all of the conversations that we're seeing in corporate boardrooms happening now. But we have those conversations all the time. I have the unique opportunity to think about Black people, what they need, what they're thinking, how we can serve them every single day of every single year. And it's a pleasure and an honor. So when you always have these issues in the back of your mind, and in every role, because we really work collaboratively. So whether you're in digital or ad sales or marketing, you're always thinking about the state of Black America and what does that mean? How can we care for our viewers and deliver what they need? So for example, whether it was the earthquakes in Haiti, whether you're looking at the hurricanes in New Orleans, we're always trying to think of how can we, respond. And we utilize our knowledge and what we know about our audience to help us get ahead of the game. For example, when COVID was just kicking off and we were all, trying to figure out how to use all these digital devices, we knew immediately that this tragedy of COVID was going to hit African Americans in a very particular way. We learned early on that only 30% of African Americans have the ability to work at home because we have jobs where they're hourly wages or gig. We're aggressive in the gig economy. So we knew we wanted to provide, more than just kind of a space of what we ultimately did was our entertainment, which is what we do to try to help people move through a situation. But, we worked closely with the United Way and ultimately raised over $19 million that we focused specifically on communities of color.
That's incredible. And I think what you talked about in terms of what BET does is shedding a new light and a different light on what the network is and what Viacom is doing. I think people think of BET Network as just just that, a network where you go for entertainment, but really you've created a socially active and socially engaged organization that then uses its tools and resources by way of entertainment, programming, and such to have a different conversation about what's happening in our communities and what's happening globally.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I got excited when you asked the question. Our mission is to entertain, empower, and engage. So we know that all of those three work together, and when they work together the strongest, that lifts us, our brand, and our community the highest. I loved all the great feedback we got around BET Awards, but we had no other choice. Like, that is how that show had to come together. We were in the middle of a crisis in our community. And, one of the things that we wanted to create was this space that reflected that moment in time, that gave artists an opportunity to express themselves, and a community an opportunity to grieve together and rejoice together at the same time.
Let me ask a little bit about some of the programming changes that you have going on. So the first is you've established Content for Change. And tell us a little bit about that initiative and why it's so important and how the community is involved in it.
Absolutely. So in the aftermath of George Floyd, I think we all kind of tried to figure out what were the things that we could do to make a difference. We've seen so many of these issues happen, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. We've done specials. We've had focus on, how do you reach out to your DA? And we realized that what we really need to do was take a step back and think of looking at a long term, what are some other things that we could do to affect the programming that we put on the air and what we share across the company from a Viacom CBS perspective. So we really took a long look and did some research. Look at the research. What are the ways that we can counteract some of these racist narratives that are happening in the world? And so we've embarked on a very aggressive campaign to look at all of our programming across BET. But the most exciting part is all of Viacom and CBS said, this is exactly what we need to be doing. How can we use our collective superpowers for good and really begin to create narratives that counteract these racist narratives and beliefs that have been out in the world. So we're engaged in that process now. We have a number of partners that we're working with, national organizations, academics, and that's what we always reach outside of our house to make sure that we're engaging the best and smartest minds.
That's great. Talk a little bit about some of those partners and how you're engaging the community, not just hearing what they're saying, but how are they actively able to help inform and influence the work that's happening?
Sure. Good, perfect example. I just got off the phone with my colleagues at the National Urban League. So, for example, we launched our voting campaign in February called Reclaim Your Vote. We launched it in partnership with Mark Marielle and the National Urban League. Mm-hmm. They have affiliates all over the country. And what's been always important to us is that I wish I could talk to, the hundreds and thousands and millions of Black people all over the place, but it's tapping into the organizations that are doing that. And together, they can let me know what's happening with their affiliates. What are they hearing on the ground from the students' organizations that they're working with? What are the ways that we can amplify their efforts? For example, in a conversation that we were having just on the phone with, my colleague Rhonda there, we came up with National Black Voter Day. This was something that we ultimately engaged over 50 national organizations, national and local student organizations, to all join in getting people prepared to create a voting plan, which we all know is now more important.
Critically important. Mm-hmm. That's great. And you're right. I mean, that type of work is so important right now, especially with all the misinformation, all the confusion that's happening. People need to know that there's a place where they can go to and a voice that they can trust. And BET's been an important, established, trusting partner within the community for decades now. And so it's really exciting to see BET really step up and do something different and do something. And it's not different because you've always been active and involved in conversations. It's just really taking that engagement to a new level. And that's what's really exciting to see.
Thank you. Definitely thinking of different ways to do it. I think when we had 106 in Park, that was one way of doing it with one particular audience.
Loved that program.
That's a classic. As we move into a more social media world, we have to always be thinking of, how we're using our social media platforms. We have Hip Hop Awards coming up on October 27th. You can expect some incredible messages around all of the issues of the moment in terms of election, getting out the vote, voting early. So really, it's a all-in process at BET. So we are engaging, as I mentioned, every department is focused on these issues, and at the same time, making sure that it's entertaining and engaging, and really staying as connected as we can to our audience.
So I also am aware that you launched another program called Justice Now, which really also takes another look at addressing the issues related to systemic racism and equity. Talk a little bit about that work that's happening and what you're hoping to achieve with it.
Absolutely. With Justice Now, in partnership with our BET News team, we are really digging deep into what are the issues that are really happening, and how can our audience, how can we as a media company affect change, and how and when do we even know some of these issues are happening in our community? And when you look at the Breonna Taylor situation, for example, there's so many elements of that case that we are just finding out months and months and months and months after, and still there's so much we don't know. Mm-hmm. So we have, and additionally, we are extremely lucky to have the great partnership of our sister network of CBS News to work with us on a host of these issues, and really helping us to explore, dig deep, provide information to our audience, and ask questions. I mean, we are learning information as we go along. So it's really something that we are excited about, and there's much more to come.
That's great. I know that one area that has been of interest, and you talked about it earlier to some degree, but just in terms of the portrayals of African Americans and communities of color on network television and in programming. What is BET doing in the area of just ensuring more Black writers, Black producers and such, to really make sure that the community is able to tell its own stories through its own eyes, and to educate and engage others in an important dialogue that needs to happen?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a number of initiatives, including one that we just launched recently, Project Create, that we gave in partnership with our colleagues at Paramount Pictures, and we gave a $1 million budget to a filmmaker that will be debuting their film Alu the Dreamer later this month. So we're excited about that. But the thing that I'm most proud of is just all of the opportunities that we give to Black creators 365 days of the year. The best example I can think of, and certainly the one I'm certainly excited about, is Jesse Collins of Jesse Collins Entertainment, who's been a longtime producer of the BET Awards, hit shows like The New Edition story on BET, is producing the Super Bowl halftime show, the Pepsi Super Bowl halftime show. Mm-hmm. And just as important as creating, new leaders now, is that we've cultivated and curated. I always say you can't find too many creators in Hollywood who haven't done some stint of time at BET or working on a BET project. And I am very fortunate to have worked with many of them over the course of their career. And I think that's one of the legacies of BET over the past 40 years.
And as you look ahead to the next 40, what do you hope BET's legacy and impact will be? Especially as we look back at these times, what do you hope the community and the broader community remembers about what BET did?
That's such a great question. I really hope it is that we were the town crier, the galvanizer, the motivator, the entertainer, and that we provided that kind of relief and moment that nobody else could. And at the same time, provided information that led to action in their local communities. As we all know, and certainly as we're seeing today, it's really about the action you take in your community. And you are responsible for that work. We all must do it together. So if we can help by providing the tools, the energy, the excitement, the connections to national partners to assist in achieving those goals, I would love if we were thought of that way.
That's great. Now, the interesting part is that many organizations are wading into this conversation for the first time. Organizations that typically have not thought about systemic racism, social injustice, the need to think about equity in a different way. They're wading in for the first time. What advice would you give to those organizations? And what are the watchouts that you think are important that organizations consider as they're wading into this tepid water to some?
The most important thing I would say is to get help. There are a number of organizations that have been doing this work for a very, very long time. And they have the tools, the research, the information that can assist. So whether that's the NAACP or the Legal Defense Fund or Color of Change, there's so many organizations that are doing this work that there's really no excuse for not getting it right. I think the other thing is taking your time. I think there was a lot of a rush to, get out and make a statement, and that's great. But then you have to sit back and really do the work inside your organization. And I always say, work your lane. Make sure that your organization has it together. Sometimes it's much more important to take the time to make sure that your Black employees and employees of color, are they paid equitably? Do they have the same opportunities for promotion? What does your recruiting techniques look like? And are you making sure that people in your leadership positions look like the world is going to look? So those are the things that I think immediately can be done. And I think it's all about having courageous conversations with the people in your company, but also not being afraid to bring people externally who are experts and resources in this field.
I agree with that 100%. And I just want to say thank you so much, Janine, for your time. This has been a great conversation. It is exciting to see what BET is doing and what the Viacom family is doing to make sure that we are having the right opportunities to have the right conversations about what's happening. And you had mentioned earlier in our pre-conversation about purpose and passion. I'd like to let you close talking about how those two words are so important as organizations and as individuals begin to step into this conversation and to make systemic change for the better for our communities and for our nation.
Well, thank you, Ayanna, so much for this conversation. It's been great getting to know you better. I feel like I have a bunch of questions for you, but we'll get to that offline. I think just in closing, the reason why diversity in every corporate room is important is because that's what people bring to work. They bring their purpose and they bring their passion. And when you have a diversity of passions and a diversity of purpose, you will ultimately get to a greater product. And if you don't have people who have that energy, that excitement, that focus on communities of color, it's almost impossible to capture what the right strategy is to act in this space and to move your business forward. So whether you're looking strictly to just move your business forward, you have to know what's happening in communities of color. We drive pretty much every single business you can think of, from consumer to retail to tech, certainly media. So even if you're looking at it strictly from that perspective, you have to have people and understand that passion. And if you are working through it from a social impact perspective, there's just so much great work to be done. And there's so many ideas that executives of color have to serve their communities and just taking advantage of that purpose and passion that we have.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, and let's keep the work going. Let's push for change.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much. And vote early, October 24th, National Vote Early Day.